It's a warm welcome to everyone. Today, we are going to talk about a very important topic on vascular necrosis post-COVID, which is becoming more common even in our daily OPDs also. So, with a great pleasure, I want to introduce one of our colleague, Dr. Amit Agarwal, a orthopedic surgeon who is based out of Delhi and has about 17 plus years of experience. His expertise includes orthopedic trauma, joint replacement, and spine surgery. He is associated with Max Group Noida Orthopedics Center. I request Dr. Agarwal to initiate the session with the topic Introduction to Avascular Necrosis in COVID. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Hari, for the introduction.
Yes.
Just a small correction. It's Apollo Hospital, actually. I'm associated with Apollo Delhi.
Oh,
Okay. So let us start. Very good evening to all of you. Thank you very much, everyone, for giving me this wonderful opportunity to speak about this important topic of post-COVID avascular necrosis of hip. So today I'll be covering about the introduction part. Rest of the topic will be covered by the subsequent speakers. So why we are talking about post-COVID AVN hip? Because we have seen that there is a manifold increase in the incidence of AVN hip post-COVID. The incidence was there before COVID also, but then suddenly after COVID, we are seeing a lot of patients coming with the hip pain and eventually they are diagnosed with avascular necrosis. And it's very important to create awareness among orthopedic surgeons so that we diagnose them early. So coming to the prevalence due to the COVID, what was the prevalence of COVID infection in India? It is, if we talk about rough figures, it is around 30 million patients of COVID infection in India, out of which 1.8 millions were hospitalized up to 64 years of age. These data were old data, but it will give us the magnitude of the situation what we are dealing with, and out of which 1 million patients required steroids injection or tablet form in the hospitalized patients, and out of which almost 25% of them are at risk of developing AVN. And if we include the patients who were taken steroids in non-hospitalized, it will be around 4 lakh patients. So there's a huge number. And what is unfortunate is that most of these patients are very young patients in their 20s, 30s, and 40s. And most of them eventually will end up with end stage arthritis in 2 to 3 years, and they will require hip replacement if not treated early, eventually leading to the huge economic as well as social burden in the society. And most of them, 60% of them, have both the joints involved. So the traditional causes we are very much well aware: traumatic versus non-traumatic. In trauma, there is a chances in femoral neck head fractures, hip dislocation, SOFI. In non-traumatic causes, corticosteroid and alcohol forms the 80% of the causes. These are two most important things we have to look into the history. Apart from that, there are other causes like idiopathic sickle cell disease, Kazan, some inflammatory pathologies, Cushing, SLE, radiation, smoking, or coagulopathies. But apart from these traditional causes, there is a new entrant which we call COVID-19. Frankly speaking, we don't know exactly whether the COVID-19 itself is the cause of increase in the incidence of AVN or the drugs used to treat the COVID, especially the corticosteroids. So there was an interesting paper published in BMJ case report in May 2021. This was one of its first paper. And subsequently, there are many other papers which shows the AVN as a part of the long COVID-19. We'll discuss about the findings in a while. So we know about the primary targets of COVID virus. There are 3 primary targets in the body, in the human body: pneumocytes, lungs are affected, immune cells, there is a cytokine storm, and the third and the most important thing which is involved is the vascular endothelial cells. And this particular entity leads to the formation of vascular thrombosis and vasculitis-like picture, which leads to the AVN in few selected patients. So the clinical picture looks like Kawasaki-like syndrome. it affects many other organs as well apart from the bone and joint. So it's a release of the pro-inflammatory mediators leading to the endotheliopathy, vasculitis, microvascular and macrovascular thrombotic events occur in the arterial, capillary, venule, and large veins. The whole scenario, the whole picture mimics the Kawasaki-like syndrome. So the pathogenesis of steroid-induced AVN, we are very much well aware. It was there in pre-COVID era as well. The main pathophysiology was the fat emboli, which was leading to the fat cell hypertrophy, which increases the intraosseous pressure, leading to the decreased blood supply. Endothelial dysfunction and hyperlipidemia are the other cofactors. There is the overall hypercoagulable conditions and associated with abnormality of the bone marrow stem cell pool. So these are all the probable mechanisms by which the steroid leads to the avascular necrosis. So we are aware about the most common area, which is the anterolateral head, and it is the site of the greatest mechanical stress, directly affect the lateral epiphyseal arteries. So there is a lot of confusion about dosage of the steroids required to develop AVN. Traditionally, we have been taught that almost 2000 milligram of or its equivalent dose is required according to the literature to cause the AVN. Few papers also suggested around 850 or 1000 milligram or prednisolone equivalent doses will be required, but it was surprisingly very low compared to the traditional dosage in COVID. So it leads to the speculation that not only steroid, but COVID itself causes a scenario wherein the doses required to cause the AVN will be lesser. So you can see only 400 up to starting from 400 to 1250. It was published in this BMJ case report, which I was discussed just right now. The doses required is less. So lesser dose will lead to the eventually AVN. And similarly, the duration is also decreased. So doses and duration both has increased post-COVID. That is very remarkable finding. So we have to be well aware about this finding. So the traditional, we used to say, according to the literature, usually 6 months to 1 year. But now, according to this paper, the duration has decreased to almost 1.5 to 2 months. So the sign and symptoms, we are very much well aware about the sign and symptoms, but we should have a high index of suspicion. Any patients with a history of COVID and any pain around the hip, or maybe presenting with the back pain or knee pain, we should diagnose them early. Whenever in doubt, straight away, always advise MRI. Don't rely on only X-rays if you have a high index of suspicion. Because in early stage, they may not have a loss of mobility or they may have a normal range of motion. So these are the late findings. So the pain and which is radiating around the buttock or groin area or maybe knee or back pain is the early warning sign. So every patient, we have to do the laboratory workup, initial X-ray or other radiological investigation has to be done in all of them according to the patient history and profile, basic test, and if you have a suspicion of any inflammatory pathology, that also has to be ruled out, or sickle cell, whatever you suspect, then you can choose the appropriate biochemical investigations. So coming to the classification, there are many classifications described in the literature, but Fickett and Ehrlich classification is the most commonly used classification by the orthopedicians, and other classification are Steenberg and ARCO is one other very important classification which gives the prognostic, which has a prognostic value, and Mitchell is also very important classification which can prognosticate the disease. So we should know some basics about this classification as well, apart from Fickett and Ehrlich. So diagnosis, you can see X-ray is not very informative in early AVN stage 1 and 2. It's hard to diagnose, so always go for MRI. So this is Fickett and Ehrlich. As an orthopedician, we all are very much aware. Stage 1 is almost normal radiology, X-ray, and stage 2 you can see decrease the density will be increased in few patchy areas, and along with cystic and sclerotic cyst formation. Stage 3 is a loss of sphericity along with collapse or crescent sign, and stage 4 is joint space narrowing. So this is the progression you can see. Stage 1, obviously nothing visible on the X-ray. Stage 2, some sclerotic changes in the superolateral area. Stage 3 is crescent sign, and 4 is involvement of the acetabulum. These are the same X-rays. You can see appreciate the cystic and sclerotic findings at the head. Stage 3, subtle crescent sign, less than 2 mm collapse. Stage 4, obviously gross destruction of the joint space along with juxtaarticular sclerosis and osteophyte formation. So there are a few other markers as well as far as prognosis is concerned. That is modified combined Kerbal angle. It is measured in the mid-coronal and mid-sagittal MRI image. So this is the arc which is formed by the lesion in two planes, and we add A plus B angle. So it will be modified Kerbal angle. It is measured in MRI image. And if it one of the study has proven that if it less than 190, the prognosis will be good, and if it's more than 240, so most of the head will eventually lead to the collapse. So whenever the patients come for the first time, we have to look into all this prognostic marker to give the more clear perspective to the patient what is going to happen and how much will be in a position to save the hip. So Steenberg classification, I'll not go much into detail, same almost MRI and radiograph comparison. So ARCO, Association Research Circulation Osseous classification, this is very important classification as far as if you want to save the hip and prognosticate, because it subclassify into the location wise medial, central or lateral involvement is there. Accordingly, you can classify. Along with that, there is a quantification tool as well, like the percentage of area involvement of the head. You can classify according to the percentage, like minimal, moderate or extensive. More than 30 degree is obviously extensive involvement, and the prognosis obviously will change accordingly. Similarly, the length of the crescent, one is the area, the other is the length of the crescent is again less than 15%, 15 to 30 and more than 30, and percent of the surface collapse in stage 3 and dome depression. So as I was showing that particular X-ray, in that there was less than 2 millimeter of collapse. So obviously the prognosis will be good, and we can try to save the hip. If it's more than 4 mm, obviously doesn't make much sense to save the joint. So these are the classical MRI images, the crescentic ring-like or geographical well-defined band of low signal within the superior portion of the subchondral femoral bone, and it represents the reactive interface between the necrotic and the reparative zones. So classical sign. So another important sign is the double line sign on T2 weighted MRI images. You can see the inner hyperintense yellow line, yellow this arrow. This is the inner hyperintense, and which represents the granulation tissue, whereas the outer hypotense line represents the combination of reactive bone sclerosis and fibrosis. So Mitchell classification is very interesting and very important as far as prognosis is concerned. Stage A represents the early disease, and stage D is the late disease. So you just have to remember that stage A represents the fat, and this is how there is a progression or natural progression of the avian fat. Second stage is subacute blood. Third, it liquefies into fluid formation or edema, and eventually the fibrosis. Stage D, whenever you see fibrosis, it's an old story. The prognosis will not be that good, whether the head is preserved or not. So this classification definitely has got a role as far as management plan is concerned. And one basic more important thing is we all know that T2 is hyper on any blood. T1 as well as T2 will be hyper intense, and fluid will be hyper on T2. So this just you have to remember this one, and you can very well diagnose or prognosticate, or you can always ask your radiologist friend to give the Mitchell classification in all of the avian cases, because traditionally they are not used to this, but then you should ask for Mitchell classification. So fat-like, as I said, increased signal within the superior aspect of the femoral head. Blood-like, both T1 and T2 are hyper, increased signal. Third one is fluid-like, and we know T2 is increased, T1 is decreased. Fourth one is fibrous and hypo on both the T1 and T2. This is T1 and this is T2. Both you can see hypo. So coming to the role of CT scan in avian, obviously, routinely MRI is the best investigation of choice, but there is definitely role of CT scan in few cases, like wherever MRI is contraindicated or doubtful, or there is a concern regarding the femoral head collapse, though, then in that few cases you can see it more clearly. Subchondral fracture also is more clearly visible in CT scan, but routinely we don't do it. Or if you have a doubt about the early degenerative joint disease in patient is in 40s and 50s, then that will be more clearly visible on CT. And presence of loose bodies can be more better appreciated with the CT scan. So this is the classical sign on CT scan. Axial CT shows the clumping and distortion of the central trabeculae, which represents the asterisk sign in this axial section, you can see. And adjacent low density region, this arrow, which represents the reparative zone. So another radiological sign, donut sign of avian on bone scan. Bone scan again is not routinely done, when if in few selected cases can be done. The central area of necrosis is represented by the cold area, and the outer reparative zone is in increased signal intensity. So with this, I would like to conclude my slide by saying that early diagnosis is the key, and we should not miss them. Whenever in doubt, always go for MRI and do the basic workup, and accordingly plan for the salvage of the hip, because most of them are young patients. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Amit, for elaborative talk on COVID in avian, and very good information on classification of the avascular necrosis, which is you talked about importance of Mitchell's classification, which is really very important for prognostic factors.